in the world? Well, first of all, Israel's government is falling, okay? And this is very significant because, obviously Israel is the center of everything that's going on with, with the end times. Israel is at the center of that. And Israel has an interesting government because they're a 7-year government. So the prime minister is prime minister for 7 years, which in itself is very interesting, right? That ties in with a lot of biblical prophecy right there. And so this is the 5th time in the last 3.5 years, interestingly as well. So it's 3.5 years, which is also half of 7. And this is the 5th time that their government has tumbled. And I know I look at that and I go, well, how is that? I mean, how can they be losing their prime minister? Didn't he just get elected like a year ago? How does this work? So I was looking into it. I'm trying to understand the Knesset, or the Israeli government, and trying to get a handle on this a little bit better. So I want to share a little bit about this with you and kind of how this ties into the end times. So basically, in the Israeli government, the Knesset, as it's called, it's basically the General Assembly, or the Congress, as we might call it. 61 seats is what's needed for a president or prime minister to maintain his position. So if it ever goes below that, and basically it can go below that anytime. They're a very flexible government. It's not something where it's like set in stone for 4 years, like in America. It's every 4 years, that things get voted again and changed over. No, you get voted in, but you could leave like the next week. I mean, there's no guarantee. So just because you were voted in, that doesn't really mean anything as far as they're concerned. The way their government works is like they vote you in, and we'll see what we think. After a while, we might say, I don't want to support you anymore, and then they just leave. It's really weird. So basically, you've got 61 people that you need in order to get elected. Once you get a majority, then you automatically, your party, puts a president in there, or a prime minister. You get to lead the country. So they did that barely this last time. They made through like an agreement they made, with the Arab kind of group, with Yair Lapid, and then Naftali Bennett representing the Jewish coalition, so to speak. And they kind of came together and made one coalition out of that. And they put Bennett in first, and with the idea that then they're going to trade and let Lapid take over, and that's what's happening now. Lapid's going to take over during this transition time, because basically what happened is 2 people left, and now a third one has left from the 61 that they had. So they're down to like 59 or something now, or 58. So so it's not looking so good for that side of the fence in terms of their government goes. So interestingly enough, people can just kind of defect and say, I don't want to support you anymore. And then it totally changes the government. They have to like totally redo everything. It's not a thing of like, well, you're still going to carry out your term or something. Like, no, it's not. It's like, you're out, and we're going to put another guy in. And if they don't do it, if they don't like graciously step down, then they can do like a vote of no confidence and just kind of take the guy out that way. So it's very interesting how it works. Well, Ezekiel 21 has an interesting scripture that may tie into this a little bit with Israel. And then I want to talk, actually, before I do that, let me read this first. Okay, so in Ezekiel, it says, and thou, let me put this in the NIV, it's a little bit more modernized for you. So Ezekiel 21:25, talking about the government of Israel, essentially. He's talking to the prince of Israel. He says, you profane and wicked prince of Israel, whose day has come, whose time of punishment has reached its climax. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Take off the turban, remove the crown. It will not be as it was. The lowly will be exalted, and the exalted will be brought low. A ruin, a ruin. I will make it a ruin. The crown will not be restored until he to whom it rightfully belongs shall come. To him I will give it. And that is, of course, talking about Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, who's going to come and to whom the scepter belongs, right? As we know, the Bible also talks about that about the scepter being given to Christ ultimately. And when you think about it, sometimes we kind of forget the fact that like Israel's government is really Christ's government, right? So Christ is going to come and he's going to take back the scepter to whom it belongs, right? As it says in Genesis, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until he to whom it belongs shall come. And obedience of the nations shall be his, right? So this scepter of who leads Israel actually belongs to the Messiah. So really, all this kind of frustration going on is really representative of the fact that things are getting shaken up because the Messiah is about to return and reclaim his scepter. But there's an interesting prophecy about kind of what's going on now. A few prophecies actually that have been, you could argue, have been fulfilled and are being fulfilled as we speak. And let me show you this. So the rabbi here, take this off for a second. A few rabbis, okay, had some prophecies. And one of them is a famous rabbi named Rabbi Kaduri, okay? And he prophesied that, well, I'll read you some of these. It says, on the eve of the year 5780, the year of corrections, there will not be a government for Israel for an extended period, and the various camps will quarrel much without a decision on either side. And then on Rosh Hashanah itself, they will fight in heaven, the holy side against the side of evil, and God and his entourage will decide between them, and this is all I can say, and from here I swore not to reveal more secrets and hidden things. Well, he said this in 1979, but he's talking about the year 5780. Well, that's the year 2020. So he prophesied this in 1979, and it came to pass in 2020, just as he prophesied, and I have that, I show that to you here, but basically in 2020, I have it still open here somewhere, in 2020, the government, here it is. In 2020, it says, following the second election, no one was able to form a government again, and a third election had to take place on the 2nd of March, 2020. An agreement was finally reached on 20th of April between Netanyahu and MK Benny Gantz, and the formation of a national unity government. Well, what's interesting is both these guys' names are Benjamin. Okay, well, let's keep reading some of these prophecies here. Okay, look at this next prophecy. This is by another rabbi named Rabbi Sasson Hai Shoshani. Okay, and he says there will come on the day that two ministers win the government in the land of Israel. Both their names will be Benjamin, and neither of them will succeed in establishing their government or kingship on that day. No one will establish their government or kingship. On that day, no one understand that the King Messiah already stands at the door, and on the Sabbath afterwards he will come and be revealed. Shoshani's statement continues, understand this and remember it. Okay, so he's prophesying, I believe this was in 2014. I may be mistaken about that, but it might be, I believe it was 2014, that he prophesied that this government, that their names will be the two ministers will win the government. Their names will be Benjamin. Well, that's what we have here in 2020, right? As we just saw, that it was Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Gantz. That's his real full name, is Benjamin, not Benny. They call him Benny, but it's actually Benjamin is his name. So it's two Benjamins. They end up winning the government in 2020, okay? And so he's saying, this rabbi is saying that when these two Benjamins win the government, know that the King Messiah is already standing at the doorway, and that he will, on the Sabbath afterwards, he will come and be revealed. Well, what does that mean, the Sabbath afterwards? Well, that's interesting because this was 2020, right? And so what are you talking about, like Saturday? Like it's going to be revealed on Sabbath? Well, not necessarily, guys. We are in the Sabbath year right now. So more than likely, what this is referring to is the Shemitah year. That's the year we're in now, which is the Sabbath year. That's the year of rest. And so we are in that year. This is the year with this 21 through 22, like late 21 through 22 is 5782, according to their civil calendar, which is their government calendar. And that started in, according to their calendar, September, basically, of last year, 2021. So we're in the Sabbath year right now. And so he's prophesying that when these two Benjamins take power, that in that following Sabbath year, they are going to, that the Messiah is going to come at that time, that he's waiting at the door, and that he's going to come on the following Sabbath. Okay, that's interesting. And then, what's this last one here? When will the Messiah come? And then this one talks about building and rebuilding walls, and that's how you're going to know when the Messiah is finally going to come. That's just another prophecy down there. But in terms of what we're talking about right now, which this government falling, and you could argue that ties into it too, because it keeps falling and keeps falling. It says here, when this gate falls down, it rebuilds, falls again, is again rebuilt, and it falls a third time. Before it can be rebuilt, the Son of David will come. Well, you could argue that maybe that is related to some of these failures of government where they keep falling and falling down and being built back up. But with these two Benjamins, it's kind of interesting because they're not out of the picture yet. That was in 2020, but they're still around. So let's take a look at this. This is one of the Benjamins here, okay? This is Benjamin Netanyahu, and he was prime minister for a long time. And he's hailing this fall, this is just 2 days ago, as Israel's worst government, and slams Bennett's charade. Okay, so he's really attacking him and trying to put him down and say that he's got the better government. And now, remember what it said in that prophecy. It basically said, no one's going to prevail. And that's kind of what you got now, right? It said, both their names are Benjamin. Neither of them will succeed in establishing their government or kingship. And basically that's what's happened, because Netanyahu, he had his kingship, but then it fell, right? So now he has the audacity to rip on Bennett, even though his government fell too. So all these guys are falling. They're failing to establish a government. This government is not lasting, right? And same thing with this Benny Gantz as well. So now they're looking for this Benjamin to come back, basically, Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benny Gantz is part of that as well, Benjamin Gantz. But now he's saying he throws cold water on reuniting with Netanyahu. Why? Because they're looking for him to lead a coalition against Netanyahu. So it says Gantz formed a coalition, governing coalition with Netanyahu, but now they're looking at Gantz joining basically an opposition against him, and so they're looking for him to form a different government, a new government, and so they've got these two Benjamins again duking it out. So instead of working together now, they're going against each other. Opposition are courting Gantz and hope to form a new government without an election. So they're trying to push this government election because basically Judea and Samaria are in play here. And this is really significant biblically as well. And so I want to share that with you. So Gantz, they're trying to get him to lead this new government and trying to get it happen like in the next week, because by the end of this month, Judea and Samaria, there's basically an agreement that rules over Judea and Samaria and makes them, kind of includes them in Israel. That's basically the West Bank, what's known as the West Bank. And so at the end of June, it ends. And if they don't renew it, they normally renew it every 5 years or so. And if they don't renew it, basically it'll become chaos in Judea and Samaria. They will have no governing authority there, and everything will break loose. What's also significant about that is, they're one Israel right now. They're one nation, the way God envisioned it. And when that breaks, if they break away, Judea and Samaria, then you've got a broken Israel again, which is exactly what happened in the Old Testament when Judea really is the land of Judah, okay? And so when they broke away back in the time of Rehoboam, Solomon's son, they said, every man for himself, me and my house will serve the Lord, and everybody to their own house. And so Judah broke away from Israel. So you had a king in Israel and you had a king in Judah. And so here we've come united. They've united back as a nation finally again. And now there's that risk that they're going to lose it all over again. So that's the concern. And the concern as well is that not only is Israel has no government, but Judea and Samaria have not been renewed as being kind of included with Israel. And so the fate of the coalition hangs in the balance. So as it says here, if the Knesset's dissolution is a done deal by June 30th, we'll pass the Judea and Samaria regulations together with opposition to head elections. So they're basically saying, look, we've got to get this thing done by June 30th or before so that we can renew this agreement that we have about Judea and Samaria so that they don't get kicked out of our nation, right? And so, Samaria is a big part of the Old Testament. When Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, that was a Samaritan woman. Jesus tells us the story of the Good Samaritan, right? And he tells her at the well, he talks about, basically the Samaritans. I was studying this today. It was really interesting, but basically there was a king named Omri, and he, right here, it says Omri in the 38th year. Let me back it up a second. He says, it's talking about Omri here. It says, he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver and built a city on the hill, calling it Samaria, after Shemer, the name of the former owner of the hill. So Omri, this king of Israel, bought Samaria. And so instead of ruling in Jerusalem now, they started to rule from Samaria. So a lot of the kings actually lived in Samaria and ruled from there. So it was a big part of Israel's history. And so Omri rested with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria. And a lot of these kings were. But the problem with these kings is they were wicked kings. They weren't good kings. And so as a result, they were worshiping Baal and false gods. And so when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman, for example, he says, you worship on this mountain what you do not know. So basically they're worshiping false god, Baal, on their mountain. It says, we worship in Jerusalem. So that's why he makes that distinction, because the Samaritans were the capital. Samaria was the capital of Israel for a time. But a lot of these kings were evil, and they worshiped Baal, and they set up all these, worship places on the high places in the mountains, worshiping false gods. And so Jesus is saying, yeah, you worship those false gods on this mountain. Well, we worship the God that we know. You worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, says Jesus there. And he says the time will come when God's worshipers will worship him in spirit and in truth. Let's take a look at that real quick. He says, and so, he asked the woman for some water, and she's like, why are you talking to me? I'm a Samaritan. You're a Jew. You're not supposed to be talking to me. And he's like, if you knew who was talking to you, this is in John 4. It's like, if you knew who was talking to you, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water, right? Let me show you this. So he came to the town of Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So this has a lot of history is in Samaria, okay? A lot of Jewish history is in Samaria. This is actually the plot of ground that Jacob gave to Joseph, is in Samaria, okay? Jacob's well is also there. And so that's where he goes. He goes to Jacob's well, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone to the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself? See, so the Samaritans see Jacob as their father. They see they are Israelites. Okay, that's the thing. The Samaritans are Israelites. So a lot of times you see in the Bible, like, what's this thing about the Samaritans? They don't like the Samaritans. Why are they, they're actually Israelites. But the problem is they were led by a lot of evil and wicked kings. So the Jews kind of look at them as sort of like, breakaway, false God worshiping heathen, even though they are actually their brothers and sisters. They are Jews. And it says, and mixed with other nations somewhat as well, those who were already in Samaria. But are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank for himself, and as did his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. At this point, you don't know how much she's taking him seriously, He told her, go call your husband and come back. So he was testing her here. She says, I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you've said is quite true. Jesus really, he goes right for it, man. And he's really getting her attention here. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Yes. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. See, and now that's the conflict. Because they're like, you guys are worshiping Baal, false God. You need to come to Jerusalem and worship the one and only God, right? Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming, and this is the time, guys, it's coming, when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know. See, they're worshiping a false god, so they don't even know what they're worshiping. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. What's interesting, though, is they're also Jews, right? They're just like kind of fallen away Jews. They're worshiping false gods. They followed dark leaders. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said, I know the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he'll explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one who am speaking to you, am he. So, very interesting. The story goes on from there. But that's what we're talking about, guys. So when we talk about Samaria and what's going on there, it's very significant, biblically, spiritually, on many levels. And so as we go back here, I just want to show you this area of what we're talking about here. So this is basically Samaria and Judea, okay? So again, Judea is kind of like the land of Judah, right? So when you hear that term Judea, that's basically where Judah separated from Israel. And then Samaria was up north. So Judah's kind of south. Samaria's up north. Well, this has become known as the West Bank. It's on the west bank of the Jordan River. Okay. So you've got these two lands that have sort of come together, but in the middle, they've kind of dug into it a little bit because they wanted to get to Israel. Or they wanted to get to, Jerusalem. Right? So it's part of the land of Israel. See, this says Kingdom of Israel, and then it says Samaria. So this is, for a time, they were in this area. So this is kind of how the Kingdom of Israel functioned. You had this Kingdom of Israel up north, and a Kingdom of Israel, south. It's not letting me go in closer to this. I don't know why. But anyway, so you get the idea. That blue area, that's the Samaria area, and then the yellow area is the Kingdom of Judah. Okay? And so they actually moved. So Jerusalem kind of got taken by Judah, and they led from there, right? And that's why the scepter will come from Judah, and Jesus is of the line of Judah, right? So David is from the line of Judah, and Jesus is from the line of Judah, and is the son of David. And so Jerusalem was part of there. That's where the temple was in Judah, and then Israel went up, and they led from Samaria. Samaria was their capital. So that's why you have this contention between the two, right? And so we finally got this united nation between these two, and now it's breaking apart again. And at the end of this month, Judea and Samaria will again become like a separate nation if they don't again renew this agreement. Now, what's interesting is what Netanyahu said here in response to all this. Notice what he says: peace and security. He used those choice terms. Peace and security must be restored to the citizens of Israel and to the streets of our cities. Unfortunately, we all see that a government dependent on the Islamic movement is unable to do so. He said this after visiting relatives of the Israelis killed in a shooting in March. Okay? So he's talking about peace and security, and we know it's when they're saying peace and security that it's all going to go down, right? So this is very significant as well, the fact that he's the guy poised to try to take over again this government, and he's talking peace and security because that's exactly what brings them down. Right? All right, let's keep going here. So I want to shift gears now and look at what's going on with the famine, okay? So let me make sure I just kind of hit on everything I wanted to share about that real quick. And then I want to get your comments afterwards. I'm just kind of cruising through right now, and then we'll get more of your feedback on all this. One other thing I want to say about their government, it has 41 different parties. There's 41 different political parties. I mean, wow. Like, we can barely get past 2 in America, So 41 parties, no wonder there's such a division. But what's amazing is that they will just kind of be so flexible and fluid that, today you have a government, tomorrow you don't. It's like, that just seems really precarious and not wise. So, it's interesting to see how this is going to play out here. Also, the fact that they have and I don't know if did I share this scripture in Ezekiel? I think I did. But in Daniel 9, we know it talks about the fact that, let's see. Well, I'll just reference it now because I'm going to look at it in a second anyway. But Daniel 9 talks about a 7-year agreement. And it's interesting that their government that is in there, or that their prime minister is in there for 7 years, at least if he can stay in there. So it'd be interesting to see if that becomes an Antichrist connection there with the 7-year agreement and the 7 years of the tribulation, if we get this new leader of Israel who is of an Antichrist nature, or is the Antichrist for that matter. It's possible. Some believe it will be a Jew. I know a lot of people are looking at Mr. O as a possibility, but there's a lot of Antichrists out there, so everybody wants the job. So all the devils want the job. So anyway, but so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The fact that there's a 7-year connection.